Hi, everybody. Welcome to Diving into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara.
Hi, everyone.
My name is Leah, and we're excited to have you joining us today on WJZZ Cool TV, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Please like, subscribe, and follow us, and we'll be having you call in later today if you're able to. Would you like to introduce yourself, Zahara?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zahara, and I'm co-hosting with Leah.
And then we've got Abel Delgado on today with us. He is the chair of the Progressive Caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party, a Flint activist, and a young Democrat who's been engaged in several things throughout the state. And we're very excited to have you today, Abel. If you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get started with our discussion today.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Thanks for having me. As Leah said, I'm chair of the Progressive Caucus of the MDP. My organizing and activism really started through the water crisis, and since then it's just grown into many different things. But yeah.
Well, today, guys, we're hoping to take a look into what progressivism looks like and means for youth throughout the country, and specifically probably focusing more in on Michigan today.
And we'd like to start it off by asking our guests how they became involved in politics and what they hope to see in their journey.
Yeah, so I sort of briefly touched on it, but I guess I can sort of go back to originally what really actually truly got me involved. So I grew up in Flint. What really created my political consciousness was probably around my junior or senior year. I always say what really got me involved in politics was just seeing my community. Um, I live in a neighborhood that has been highly gentrified over the past decade, and I recognized that first when I was, like I said, a junior and senior in high school. The stadium, there's a football stadium that used to be a public entity, but now ended up getting privatized and sold for a dollar. Um, uh, as a junior, I recognized that in high school, I recognized that we as a community could have came together for that singular dollar and could have used our resources together to have that as a public entity and sort of build community power throughout the years. And since then, it's sort of just, and obviously I didn't know what it was at that point, but we know that that's textbook gentrification. And it's, like I said, it's just grown from then and sort of has sort of instilled this sense of me focusing on building community power.
Great, thank you so much, Abel. So we have a question, and I think this is a good question for us to go through what exactly you do with the Progressive Caucus. But the question is, can you clarify the difference between progressive and traditional politics?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start off with, getting some definitions out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't think there's a simplified way of putting it.
In your opinion, how would you clarify or explain that to people?
Yeah, like I said, there's definitely not a simplified way of putting it. I definitely go back to Progressive Caucus put out a statement back around early post Bernie Sanders in 2016. It was around 2017, 2018, where they provide a statement on defining what progressivism is. If you give me a sec, I can reference that. But yeah, essentially, it covers many different aspects as it relates to equity, workers' rights. Essentially, in my personal opinion, I think it's really just pushing the needle toward justice at the end of the day, right? And like I said, that can mean a plethora of things, and I don't think there's a simplified response to it at the end of the day. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what you're talking about is some of the identity politics too issues that we see, and kind of how people are more motivated sometimes by some of the progressive issues than we've seen by traditional people.
Yeah, and I think what
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, and I think what another thing of it, I think a main focus point of it is looking at politics through a movement lens rather than a transactional lens. I think at the end of the day, that's honestly the best way to truly define it. Obviously, you can talk about many issues and talking and fighting for justice, but I think at the end of the day, it truly revolves around is are your actions going to be rooted in a much broader movement or in a transaction? with an individual or organization or whatever it might be, right? I think it just is focused on the days after election day rather than just the headliner, for lack of better words. So, yeah.
Yeah, so how are some of the ways that you, in your positions or in your experience, have seen that kind of longevity that goes beyond just one candidate or beyond one campaign or one issue?
hmm Well, I guess I can give personal references. In 2018, I ran for Flint School Board and lost. Even though I got some major endorsements like Southpaw, Democracy for America, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but either way, I ran a solid campaign, and like I was unsuccessful. But 2 years later, I handpicked a candidate and encouraged her to run for that seat, and she overwhelmingly ran. And she didn't put out anything. She didn't have flyers. She didn't have yard signs. She didn't have anything. She just ran on name recognition alone, and I recognized that she strategically could win that seat. And she's been able to push for some of the same issues I would have pushed for, and actually able to commit her entire time to be able to be on that board and serve in that role. And that's just one instance. I mean, there's another where I was a campaign manager for someone running for county commissioner. Um, and we put up a really good fight with very limited resources. And we lost that. But 2 years later, we created enough of an anti incumbent narrative because of the fact of them mismanaging funds, corruption, voting against declaring racism as a public health crisis, many different things that you assume would from a Democratic incumbent, right? We pushed him on the incumbent on a lot of different issues that 2 years later down the road, he was ousted by a different candidate. Now, granted, we didn't hand select that candidate, but also we feel that we played a huge role in Ted Henry being unseated. And I think that's sort of the outlook that we have to have. If we can teach, it's more so I see it as a thing of teaching somebody how to fish rather than you just being the one person to provide the entire community all the fish. So if we're able to, as a community, come together to teach everyone how to fish, that's how we can actually start really truly building a movement.
Yeah, most definitely. Can you think of examples from some of the campaigns you've been in where you've seen movement politics go above and beyond?
Well, I mean, I think I most saw that in the cannabis movement because that was my entry into politics was the cannabis movement. So there was a lot where it's like and some other campaigns where you can see the difference between the Democrats and Republican, but like in the cannabis, it was something that united people because they were all pushing for the same thing, which was legalizing and down the line unscheduling cannabis or rescheduling it at least. So that's somewhere where I've seen that.
Yeah. I think some of the fellowship programs that I've seen with some of these campaigns where they like get like these high schoolers and these college people involved, and sometimes there's a gap between, I think, the party's size grabbing those fellows, but those fellows usually then go on to another campaign, or they join like one of the young dem groups, or they join Sunrise Movement. And so we're seeing them continue with those issues that got them involved. They're finding other ways to kind of stay engaged. I'm really excited about Washtenaw. There's 6 active high school dim groups within Washtenaw County right now, and like that's super impressive to me. And it came out of them wanting to do something for the 2020 elections, and it went beyond the 2020 election now.
Yeah, I think like that's how we like. I started with the cannabis movement, and it went way beyond that. So everybody
Yeah.
has their entry and what they,
And I think that goes kind of back to Dr. Napanji's question about, what's the difference between progressive and traditional politics. Is I find the progressive movement to be much more like a family movement. Very sincere, very much camaraderie, and I think that that allows us to actually have a movement instead of a moment.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's definitely from a relational perspective as well, for sure, compared to much more monolithic.
yeah. And I think with like the traditional politics, it's like if you stray a little bit from what they identify, like within the traditional, Republican or Democratic Party, it's like you're swaying away. Whereas like, the progressive movement incorporates from different viewpoints to make things fair and equitable for the people in
Yeah,
in a sense.
I think equitable is an important term there too. Yeah. Well, Abel, what would you say is the goal with the Progressive Caucus to kind of, maybe push the narrative more to explain what progressivism is, to recruit more people into the movement, Kind of where are you with that,
Mhm.
or where do you think we should be going?
Well, so a big thing that we're focused on with Progressive Caucus for these next 2 years, because we have 2 year terms when we're elected at convention, um, is to really truly redefine progressivism. Just to be blunt, we know how progressivism has been whitewashed, how it's been colonized, and how realistically we see a lot of issues, not only just within MDP, within progressive circles, just broadly speaking, right? We see all these political issues from a Eurocentric perspective, but we don't see it in the context of Black and Brown liberation. So realistically, we need to redefine that. We need to organize and we need to address that. We do that through a relational perspective, like what we've sort of hinted at, right? Like having conversations, making sure that we're out there in the community fighting for Black and Brown folks, right? And there's a bunch of different things that we have in mind. Actually, we just had our call an hour or two ago and really went in depth about our action plan going forward on what that's going to look like and how we're going to put that into practice at a grassroots level. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so no, I was gonna go ahead with Dr. Napanji's question because I think this will give us more insight into the Progressive Caucus. So what is it? What do you look for in a progressive candidate?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, as far as well, that's what you have a questionnaire for. But besides that, and like being able to use that to vet them, right? I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a simple one way answer to do that, because you could say that, like, oh, yeah, they need to make sure that they're fighting for equity. They need to make sure that it's intersectional. But also at the same time, if they're doing that, they could also, I don't know, they could just be not know how to communicate with their community. They could also not just be completely not be able to have conversations and develop those relationships in their community as well. And that, I mean, who knows what those circumstances might be, but I think it's overarching a lot of different issues as it relates to equity. Obviously, equity has to be at the forefront of every single issue, whatever that might be, whether it be Medicare for all, whether it be Green New Deal, whether it be um, uh, tuition-free college and universities, whatever that issue might be, right? Um, uh, but I think it's very multifaceted in a lot of different ways, and it's not a binary answer. Like I said, I mean, I'll probably end up having to pull up the Progressive Caucus definition and sort of like expand on that, because I think it really, like, in a lot of different ways, it sort of like it really accurately defines what progressivism means.
But yeah, so I mean, just to add on to that, like one way I explain it to some people is that in the progressive candidate or just in a progressive movement, you look at how the issue is going to affect not just like the person basically next to you, but how it's going to affect like the overall being and how it's going to progress and affect for the future generation. Whereas you have in a lot of like, different or the way the politics was before, they focus on just one thing. And even though it can interact or, affect other things, that is their focus. So like you have to look at the picture as a whole and see how you can make things once again equitable and equal for everybody and not just in one part.
I think it's difficult sometimes when they're really good on like one issue, but they may be like really bad on like two or three other pretty progressive issues. And it's so for me, it's like I can work with you on that one issue, but like I may not be endorsing you
Yeah.
because of these other issues that you're holding back. But like as far as like getting the work done, I am someone that believes like, if you and I agree on project A, but Abel disagrees with me on project C, I'm going to work with all three of us on A, and I'm just going to, find someone else to do C and probably push that elected a little bit harder. What does it look like for pushing electeds? Like, how do you have communications with them, or how do we suggest people reach out to them and really push them on these issues? Oh,
Uh,
our sound just disappeared. Oh, give us 1 second here. It looks like our sound vanished. Unable. Hmm.
Abel, can you still hear us? it, it,
All right, I'm gonna check this magical speaker box in the corner. Zahara, if you want to kind of answer how you've pressured, I know you've done a lot of like epilepsy legislative and cannabis legislative calls.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the thing that I've done most is cannabis issues. And sometimes you get a candidate who is very good on cannabis issues, but in relation to like everything else, um, that they're not somebody that I could endorse or follow or anything like that. And sometimes you have the opposite, where it's like a candidate has a lot of the progressive issues and things like Medicare for all or any of those things, but they're very behind on the cannabis issue. And since that is a big thing for me, that's like one way where it's not, I won't help the person. I mean, depending on what they are, but it would kind of not get me as motivated to support them, because once again, cannabis is what got me involved in politics.
All right, so the
Yeah.
magical speaker box looks exactly the same. We're getting a suggestion from somebody of how to disconnect it, so we're gonna try to get this sound fixed here. I apologize, guys. Sometimes technology is great, sometimes it's bad. Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I have done is sometimes taking meetings with your electeds, even when you may not get the outcome you're hoping for. Something I think that I was taught by some of the representatives I've interacted with is that call cards are so important. Like they look at, how many yeses and how many nos are calling in favor of something. And so it sounds kind of silly, but sometimes making those phone calls and those emails or getting that meeting, even if you're not going to get necessarily the reaction you want, it's pushing that narrative. It's making them more aware that the progressive movement is right here.
Yeah, and then this way they'll know, once they have question or once they want to take that issue up, they'll know who to turn to guide them or to help them along with it.
Well, I'm really sorry, guys. We are hoping we can get Abel's sound back on. I think I'm gonna step out real quick. I guess, Zahara, if you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the Young Dems right now, that would probably be a great idea.
Yeah. So the Young Dems right now, what we're asking, we are gonna start endorsing for some of the local races. We don't just endorse the younger Dems, but we do look at the younger generation, since that is our focus.
The Bluetooth device is auxiliary input mode.
Since that is our following, and we try to get from them what it is that they want to see in the movement and what they're hoping to see from the candidates that we endorse and what issues are important to them. So I know one of the things that is important to a lot of people is the Medicare for all issue, and that's one thing we look for in the progressive candidates, as well as making sure that things that have been affecting like the older generation for a long time, that it does not affect the younger generation in that way, such as like medical debt or the college tuitions and all of that. So that's one of the things that we do focus on in the Young Dems. Sorry. Okay, is it working now?
Abel, can you try speaking again? Full disclosure, I'm totally just unplugging and plugging things back in and hoping that it works. Well, you guys are watching WJZZ Cool TV, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And you're watching Dive into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara, and we are experiencing some fun technical difficulties right now.
The fun of a first show.
Yeah, everything's always a learning curve.
Yes, that's exactly how it is.
So thank you for those of you that are hanging in there with us. I think we may have
Abel, just hop on and hop off and hop back on for a second. Let's see if we can get you reconnected that way.
All right, so A little bit about where we're hoping to go with the show while we're waiting to see if we can get the sound back on. Otherwise, we'll just tell you a little bit about our direction that we're going for. Thank you, Denise, for the great show comment. We really do appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. So, Zahara and I have been working in politics independently for a long time, but together for about 3 years now. One of our goals was to find a way to bring more of a voice to the young folks in politics. A lot of times we can't get in the same room. Sometimes, we're still treated a little bit differently. Okay. We're going to have Abel call back in. So we kind of thought about, maybe we would do a podcast or something like that. So this has come out of that brainchild of ours of how can we get more voices? So, Abel is, he is young progressive MDP chair. So we're going to be having young candidates on, young electeds on. We'll be having conversations with what it looks like to run as a young candidate and then what it looks like to be a young elected. And we're also hoping to have a different perspective where we'll bring on some of the people who work in the office and ask them, what is it like to work for an elected? What is it like to do constituent calls and legislative calls?
Yeah, while also putting a focus on the younger generation who are already in those positions of office, such as the state reps and the people in Congress who are the younger generation leading the movement for everyone.
Yeah. So we're hoping to bring an outlet that will allow people to basically share what their story is. Because a big part of organizing, as you heard from Abel and as you've heard from Zahara and I, is about relationships and relational building. So we're hoping to be able to create a platform that will allow for you to hear that story and then also to promote what the young people are looking for and needing. I'm hoping to have chairs of the high school Dems, the youth caucus, the college Dems. We're so fortunate to have so many active organizations within Michigan, and we're excited to be giving an opportunity for their voices to be heard through the show.
Yeah, and along with those is we know once campaigns happen, we know all the candidates and who they are, but we don't know the people behind the scenes, the ones who run. I mean, like, and like Leah and I met through Dana's campaign, and we started like doing work.
Dana Nestle's campaign.
Dana Nestle's campaign. Yes, sorry, Attorney General Nestle's campaign. So that's our first meeting, and we actually connected not just on that, but on the cannabis issue, and we started moving further into politics from there. So sometimes it's that one issue, but you connect on so many other things, and that starts a movement in itself. So that's one thing we were hoping to get from the show, is to give the voices to the ones to the younger generation, so they can have that platform and talk about the issues that are important for them.
Yeah. Let's see, Abel, do we have you back?
Do you? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we have you back. Fantastic. So sorry about that break, everybody. But Abel, we were just telling a little bit about the direction the show is going in and where we thought it was heading. But I guess we can talk a little bit about what we think it looks like to be a young progressive elected. Like, what types of issues should they be tackling? I realize, we have school board, city council, state reps. So there's so many different levels. But, for the state of Michigan, what do we feel are like some of the top priorities for, our electeds to be listening to the progressives on and really taking action on right now?
That can be a lot.
So, what a question, I realize.
Well, I mean, obviously, I guess it makes most sense for me to go look at it from a much more local lens, right?
Yeah.
So in Genesee County, Commissioner Dominique Clemens, he's been a true progressive ally in a lot of different ways, pushing for Pride Month to be declared in Genesee County, and putting the Pride flag during June. Also talked to possibly putting up the flag for Juneteenth as well. Also making sure to pass the Crown Act at a local level to not discriminate against hair. And I'm sure he's told me 1,000,001 different other things they're introducing as well. So he's unknowingly has become a very strong progressive ally in a lot of different ways. But I mean, I think it goes I think that's the floor in a lot of different levels. And I think we as say we, as if I am one, even though I'm not, but I think young elected officials need to be bold with a lot of these different issues. And I think that's what Dominique did as well. I mean, yeah, it's something simple like a Crown Act, but now because of that, the two Republicans on the county commission in Genesee County are have been giving him a very hard time, saying that he's acting like a legislator and all these other issues, quote unquote issues. But I think it takes, like I said, I think it takes being bold on a lot of different stances and pushing against the norm and against the status quo. Whether that be to pass the Crown Act, whether that be to push for a Green New Deal at a local level, whether that be to push for whatever issue it might be, right? I think I think it's rooted in being bold and fighting for what your community truly needs to see.
Yeah, I like that word bold. I think that that sounds like really empowering. So whenever I think of like who is the progressive leader, I'm a really big Line 5 like, well, I guess shutting down Line 5 advocate. I was going to say Line 5 advocate, and that
Yeah,
was not
that's
the
the
wording I
opposite,
wanted.
Leah. No.
I want you shut down Line 5. Um, um, but I think
Water
that
warriors. Look what she's talking about.
my words, people. Anyway, if you didn't catch it, there was a lot of demonstrations this past couple weeks for shutting down Line 5. And when AG Nessel came out to really start pushing the lawsuits, we had a handful of legislatures that came out and supported her. And it's not an easy thing to come out and support Line 5. You know, there's a lot of interests involved in that. And you know what is the plan going forward is still kind of shaky in some spots, but we know that what we have isn't working and we can't keep it. But I think about Senator Irwin and I think about Senator Polhanke, who came out in support of Line 5, and I think about in the House Representative Pahutsky and Kolazar and Youssef Rabi, the fact that they came out and 5. We have a lot of Democratic elected leaders, right? 5 of them stood up and said, "We're with you, AG Nussel. We got you." You know, as things have progressed, a lot more people have come out and they're in support of shutting down Line 5. They're showing up at the rallies. They're speaking in support. Also, if you think of it, definitely reach out and, you know, thank AG Nussel and Governor Whitmer for what they're doing on Line 5. Like, it's a huge battle. But it was 5 of them. Not all of our Democrats stood up and did that. So to me, that is like a really high level of when I see a true progressive leader, when they're not afraid to, you know, step outside of the comfort and the norms that they have. And again, shut down Line 5, guys.
Yeah, not advocating for Line 5. We want to shut it down. Get rid of it.
But you know, in the same token, I've gone up to the pipeline paddle out protest that we have where we kayak underneath the Mackinac Bridge, and Senator Irwin and Youssef Rabi, or Representative Youssef Rabi, they make the drive just like I make the drive to go up there and kayak out and be there. So you know, going above and beyond. And then when they do go to those types of events, it brings this sense of community and relationship with our electeds that I think is really unique. That I feel the progressive circle really does in a beautiful way.
Yeah, and in my community, Representative Hamoud is really good about that, where he takes the concerns of the community, especially as far as public health issues. So he takes those issues very seriously, and he makes sure that he's in tune to what the community needs are.
Yeah,
And I
which
think
is a
that's
huge concern in
yeah, and I
Dearborn.
think that is one of the things that we look for in the candidates and in the elected officials, is that because I mean, let's face it, we do have a lot who all they're worried about is getting reelected. So they'll do what they need. I mean, we have to be truthful about it. They'll do what they need to get reelected. And one thing that I look for is that they're not doing something just to get reelected. They're doing what the community actually needs and listening to them. I think that's one thing that makes a really good candidate and elected official.
Yeah, most definitely. And something else that I like to touch on is the people that work in their office really make a difference. So, you know, Abel, when we took our little hiatus there with you, I was talking about we're going to try to bring on people who work in the offices and ask them what it's like to work for an elected as a young person. You know, what is that experience like? Because I can tell you that I have seen representatives where like I couldn't get a hold of them or they were just totally unresponsive on issues. You know, I think about Representative Dingell's office. I used to have a hard time contacting her or getting her to be responsive on issues, and she had a changeover in staff, and it was a world of a difference. You know, so the people that the young, oftentimes young people that are working in these offices are doing a huge part of the work too, and we're hoping to be able to kind of lift up their voices. You know, sort of the organizers behind the scenes.
Yeah, and they're usually the bridge between the people and the elected officials. But the behind the scenes bridge.
Yeah,
that make the difference on a lot of issues.
I like how you use the term organizers behind the scenes, Leah, because I think that's like really what a lot of it's rooted in. Obviously, we have similar organizing backgrounds through Michigan United and Michigan People's Campaign, right? But I mean, the term that they use is a system of co-governing, right? And I think that's a big aspect when it comes to meeting with these electeds and developing these relationships to get our issues met, right? And to actually come together as a community and fight for specific issues.
And as a reminder, you're watching Diving into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara on WJZZ Cool TV. We're streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Please like, subscribe, and follow us. And if you would like to call in and join the conversation with Abel and Zahara and myself, you can do so at 313-355-6018. We'd love to have you join the conversation with us, or feel free to make a question in the comments below. So back to something that we mentioned is organizers. I'd love to talk about what it means to be an organizer. I think sometimes we get into our political jargon, and we say, "Oh, I'm an organizer," but like, what is that?
and yeah, even within the organizing, there's so many different sections and so many things that can happen.
Yeah, like Zahara's a text banker, phone banker, or guru. I'm a field director, but we're organizers as one thing. So, like, Abel, how would you necessarily say, like, you define an organizer?
I mean, I personally think it's more so like rooted in a lot of aspects of power and actually utilizing people power, right? Obviously, we know what we're up against, and as organizers, it's our job to organize people collectively to build power for whatever that purpose might be, whether it be a campaign or whether it be an issue or a million different other things. Like you said, your expertise is more in field. Zahara's is more in text banking, phone banking, and obviously I'm more so an organizer when it comes to direct actions and rallies and a million other things, right? So there's it can be about as complicated as defining progressivism too, but yeah. I think when we're defining these terms like progressivism, like organizing, I think when you look at it from what it's rooted in context, right? Rather than just like a broad, like narrow-minded definition.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like, again, that's one of the cool things about it is, like, it takes a very wide, diverse variety of people to make the things happen. If we were all just field directors, like, wow, would we ever knock some doors? Like, I'm pretty cool with that. But, like, we would never make the phone calls, or we would never have the fundraisers that we have to get the literature, to get the word out there. So it takes a variety of us to get stuff done. You mentioned direct action. Could you give us like a simple definition of what a direct action is?
Yeah, I guess I can give a real life definition if that sort of works too.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I'm a Flint activist, and a few years ago, when former Governor Snyder shut down the water distribution sites, or the bottled water sites in Flint, a lot of residents obviously were upset with that, and we used that populism that was created there because people were naturally upset to within a week mobilize about 200 people to go down to Lansing and actually shut down the state legislature. Where we said where we chanted "Do your job, open the pods," and almost immediately the water distribution sites open back up again. That's a form of direct action where we organize collectively our power and make sure that our demands are met. There's obviously 1,000,001 different other instances. There's a lot of organizing theory going back to Alinsky, Cesar Chavez. The list can go on, right? But there's a real life example, I guess, of what a direct action could look like.
So, since you brought up we were going to ask you this, but with the Flint issue, Flint was put into the spotlight because of the whole water issue. So, what does the situation look like right now, and what is it that still needs to be done, and how can people help with anything that needs to be done?
Yeah, it definitely is getting harder and harder to answer that question because it's still not fixed, obviously. And obviously, when it first arose, everybody's like, "Oh, this foundation or that foundation or that foundation." I think a big aspect of it is
Can you give just a little bit for anybody who doesn't know about the issue in Flint, what it was and what made it so.
of the Flint water crisis. Yeah. For those who aren't aware, obviously, um, Flint was essentially poisoned by policy. It was in response to the emergency manager law. Um, and because of that, or we all ended up losing our democracy and any decision-making processes, and those emergency managers made a decision to switch to the Flint River, and because of that, it caused um, the uh, chemicals that were built up around to coat the pipes ended up dissolving and ended up dissolving most of the pipes, leaching lead into our water supply, even after we switched away from the Flint River. So since then, we've been dealing with this for 7 years now, I believe, just recently. So it's still ongoing, and this is just how it is. I mean, DC has had a lead issue very similar to Flint, but but most of these instances are just thrown under the rug and they coat it with gentrification, and because it's gentrified and everything's all better now, they end up just ignoring the issue. Rather than actually putting equity at the forefront of it, rather than actually fighting for systemic changes. I mean, everybody knows that the water crisis came out of bad policy decisions. For example, the emergency manager law, but there hasn't really been a push at all whatsoever by the House Democratic Caucus to actually abolish the emergency manager law, and we've been demanding that for years now, since the beginning, since before it was even enacted in Flint, right? So despite all that, this is like it's still a systemic racism for first and foremost, but just overall systemic inequity in a lot of different ways, and issues that are not being resolved.
So is there a direct action or anything that the public can help with in this situation? A call to action?
Um, Trying to figure out what chat to put on.
Sounds like you wear a little too many there, Abel.
Yeah, that's an understatement. I mean, personally, I think the biggest thing is really just continuing to push and making sure that narrative is out there. There's a lot of different aspects with it. Like I said, uh, it's grown to different stages, and now it's more so as I think personally, as organizers, we need to look at it from a lens of confronting gentrification, because it's just being as a means to silence the water crisis, to silence poverty, to silence shootings, to silence all these other socioeconomic problems, right? Rather than actually addressing the root. So broadly speaking, I just say to just continue to making these issues known and making sure to, if it affects your community, to fight against it, to continue to organize, because realistically, the water crisis came out of organized people coming together, protesting down the street in sub-zero weather, when nobody heard them, when our congressman wouldn't hear us, when our mayor wouldn't hear us, when our senator, when every single rep wouldn't hear us. We continued to march on the streets until we made it known. And then when we did, we ended up just continuing to not let up.
I admire your dedication and strength, and it's unfortunate that you were put in a position that it had to be shown so obviously. But
Yeah, and it's like I mean, I don't think we even realized that it had been that many years.
No, you said 7 years,
and I'm like, yeah, I looked at how has it been
Yep.
7 years?
I think seven.
Yeah.
So my little brother's 18. He just graduated high school. Shout out Bobby. But I think about 7 years ago, he was 11. He's completely grown up in that time frame, and it's still the same thing. That's just insane to me. And then I think back to the 2016 election. They came to the presidential election. They came to Flint. They mentioned Flint on the debate stage, and we were like, "Oh my gosh, we can't believe we're hearing Flint." And then nothing ever happened. So
Mhm.
a lot of times it sounds cliche, but your vote really does matter.
Mhm.
And so, like, we really need to be putting, especially, I like that you started a lot of your stories at the local level, because I think that's where you can have the most impact. And we really need to be pushing our electeds much, much harder and making them realize that they do work for the people and that they're put there with a vote, and they can just as easily lose that vote if they're not following through on their promises. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know. The Flint
exactly. I agree.
is a hard one. It's a heavy one. I'm sorry you guys are still experiencing it. And definitely, if you have action items or direct action, don't hesitate to let us know. We'd love to let our listeners know about how they can get involved and help the people of Flint. Sorry, I was pausing and thinking still. I just 7 years is just a lot.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
that's hard. So I think
a while.
when we talk about that, we talked about direct action, we talked about gentrification and like sort of how things are changing. What does that mean, do you think, for like the young people that are, like my brother graduating high school now and going into college? What do we hear the most from our members and our friends and our networks of young that they're the most concerned about, do you think?
I guess sort of you want to expand on that a little bit more as to what the direction you're wondering with that question.
Like what issues you hear people the most concerned about, or maybe what motivates them to get involved the most recently?
Um, well, I mean, I think it like sort of goes beyond just. I mean, obviously we know like young people are as progressive as they've ever been on any issue, right? If you're talking about a young person pushing for Medicare for all, they're not just going to push for Medicare for all. They're also going to push for a better Medicare for all, right? Because we know Medicare has its own problems. So we know that, and that goes with everything. It goes beyond just what's in the like what's mainstream, right? When it comes to issues. So I think it goes beyond just singular issues and actually getting young people into leadership positions, whether it be actually elected or actually hearing their voices in the first place, right? Because so many times that young people, organizer friend of mine just always jokes about how young people are always just appreciated for social media, for campaigns, rather than actually like being put into positions of leadership. And that's an issue, right? Our voices are valid in a lot of different ways, and we're just not appreciated in that, and it causes burnout and it causes lack of engagement as well. Sort of taking a different perspective there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think like, for organizers, and which obviously that's what the three of us are, like that's a really important thing to look at. And that brings me back to like the fellowship programs that I see campaigns doing, is giving training to high schoolers so that they can go and they can get hired onto these campaigns. And part of the campaign world is brutal. You jump from campaign to campaign to campaign, like it's inconsistent hours, sometimes it's inconsistent pay. Like it can be brutal, but we do it because we love it, right? So if we're giving these people training and skills as like high schoolers beginning college, and they're able to go and get these positions and they already have those leadership skills, that gives them the credibility. Because I think that I know for me, when I was doing deliveries for Attorney General Nessel throughout the state, I was 23 at the time, but I look younger, right? So people would be like, "Oh, okay," and they would just kind of like dismiss it. I'd be like, "No, no, 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 no! Like I'm one of her field directors. Like I'm here to drop off literature, trying to have a meeting." They would just be like, "Oh, okay." Like they just didn't expect like a young person to be in a position of leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's definitely a changing the narrative, I suppose. And like, not just having them as unpaid interns on your campaign.
Yeah, it definitely is a thing of making sure that like our voices are actually welcome in the room and not going to be um, uh, overly criticized, or we're just going to be treated as infants and patronized for us speaking in the room, right? Like every other meeting that you'll have at a party function or any political function, it's like, oh, I wonder what young people are thinking. How do we outreach to youth? How do we outreach to youth? How do we? Literally is what it's the constant question that's just on repeat. And it's almost as a sense of realistically, it's in a sense of like tokenizing rather than actually wanting to hear what the youth have to say, right? Because if you were hearing what the youth have to say, it would be self-evident. You wouldn't even have to ask that question.
Yeah, you just kind of want to check that box of like, we have this many young Dems in our organization.
Yeah, or look, we took a meeting with or we talked with the Young Dems, but that nothing came out of that because they just used it in some instances as a photo op or something to help their campaign in a sense.
Mhm.
I think some of my favorite campaigns that I saw last election cycle had younger campaign managers. I think about Eli Savitz's campaign, prosecutor for Washtenaw County. He had two young men as his campaign manager and deputy campaign manager. And they were put into a leadership role, and they ran an amazing campaign. And I think it was a great example of like, give young Democrats an opportunity to be in those leadership positions. Don't keep telling us to wait a turn, but give us that opportunity right now.
And I think once you have the younger generation, then you're going to have more of the youth rise up and actually volunteer on those campaigns, actually become involved once they see that, oh, okay, there's somebody that I can relate to in this campaign. There's somebody that is going to listen to me. My voice is going to be valid. Whereas when all you see is the same people, or the older generation, it's like, oh, well, they're not going to listen to me because I've been talking to the older generation and they've been the same. So I think, as the campaigns are changing, we have to see where the people's voices are, and those are the voices that we have to make sure are raised up and have their moment.
Yeah, definitely.
To recruit more of the younger generation and more people into these rooms.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, you are watching Dive into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara on WJZZ Cool TV, streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. Please like, subscribe, and follow us. And if you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call at 313-355-6018. So I think how do we get the young people into those rooms becomes the question. We want to be in them, but how do we help get them into those rooms then? Is it just running campaigns and winning our seats alone? Or is it kind of demanding the spot at the table at this point?
I think it more so leans on the latter there, right? Of like demanding a presence be known, and really truly developing leadership over time, right? I don't know if we mentioned it was mentioned earlier in the call. Obviously, you serve as chair of the Young Democrats of Michigan, but at the time I was actually vice chair of the Young Democrats of Michigan, and obviously we all served on the YDM together. And there was a point when we were just first elected to that where there was a huge learning curve where we weren't really informed of anything like that. We weren't really trained we weren't really developed as leaders over time. Yeah, we had leadership qualities and traits and characteristics and had the capability to put into that position, but no one ever really showed us the ropes. And that's issue in a lot of different ways. And I think we recognize that. And that's why early on, we're trying to already, even though I'm 23 and I honestly don't know you guys' age off the top of my head, but we're already trying to develop leaders and bring new people into the fold, right? As we see YDM continuing to grow their board and YDM continuing to develop leadership over time. And I'm doing the same thing with Progressive Caucus, making sure to involve young people for some certain congressional district coordinator positions or other positions that might be on the board. And it goes beyond just like, oh yeah, do our social media. No, I want you actually leading this. I want you to actually take charge of this, get experience, because I actually believe in you. I believe in your vision. I believe in the issues that you're pushing for. And I think you have a future in politics. And we need to actually invest in that. And it says a lot that we as young people are the ones saying that and putting that into practice when this should have been the practice for decades. I mean, we know that the GOP does this overwhelmingly. I mean, we saw that with Romney and Ryan campaign. We see that with their House speaker selections, right? But we as Democrats honestly end up sort of fall behind in a lot of different ways when it comes to that. We need to sort of step our game up.
Yeah. I think that right now on the Young Dems of Michigan board, on the Youth Caucus board, I believe on your board, there is actually all three boards have someone that is 18 or 19. So like we finally are getting some of those younger representatives to be on the board. As chair of the Young Dems, I'm extremely fortunate that several of the candidates for the Michigan high school Dems have reached out to me. They're actually having their elections at the beginning of June. And I'm 26, Abel. I'm closer to 30 these days. So it's kind of crazy having these meetings with 16-year-olds who have full platforms, full policies. They've really thought out what they're running for, why they're running for it, and they're like super on fire. Like they are ready to go. And like I have just felt so like refreshed from these conversations.
Yeah, and being the older one, Mikhail is probably gonna message right now and say, no, you're not that old.
Yeah.
Being the older one from the younger Dems, there is also that difference in the way I became or I viewed politics and the way the generation that grew up on the technology or started the movement in technology is different than how I viewed it. And it's like integrating those together to especially when you're working on campaigns, to reach the different generations and the different gaps within the systems.
And there are huge gaps. So the high school Dem candidates, I reached out to me. I asked them like, "Where's your Facebook page?" They're like, "Oh, Leah, no one's on Facebook." And I was like, "What do you mean no one's on Facebook? I run 14 pages on Facebook. What do you mean people aren't on Facebook?" And they sent me this cute little note card, and it has like all of their social and like their platforms, and never seen it. And then every single one of the high school Dems candidates sent me one of them. And I was like, okay, this is a learning gap. Like this is where like we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, right? But we're not on whatever social media platform these high schoolers are on. So like kind of having these groups that connect, high school, college, post college, maybe graduate students, and figuring out like what are the ways to reach them. I literally had no idea what this little postcard thing was, and it was so cool. And now I have to have Noah teach me how to make one. But like, it's a learning curve, I think sometimes, and there's a lot of learning gaps, and I think that there's gaps from the party, there's gaps from boards changing over, and there is just generational gaps. My brother told me that only old people were on Facebook, and I thought he was kidding. And then I was told by multiple other high schoolers that that's actually what it is. So it really is something that, like, okay, so now that I'm aware of that, all right, how are we going to reach those 16, 17, and 18-year-olds? How are we going to get them registered? How are we going to get the members in the party? And I'm really excited to hear some of the ideas that both Dylan and Noah, who are the two chair candidates for Michigan High School Dems, have put forward. And a lot of it is chapter building. And I know, Abel, that's something that you're doing right now, too, is trying to get a lot of chapter building and YDM's chapter building. And I think that is where we take like a state thing and we bring it right back down to that local level again.
Yeah.
So what does that look like, do you think, Abel, if you wanted to talk a little bit about
chapter? Yeah. So with chapter building, I look at chapter building as a leadership development tool more than anything, right? And I mean, I'm obviously biased when it comes to it, but I was put into the position of chair of the Progressive Caucus through chapter building, right? We formed the CD5 Progressive Caucus, Congressional District 5 Progressive Caucus, because we were locked out of power, literally being able to be engaged in our local county Progressive Caucus, which wasn't chartered under the state or anything. So we went above that and decided to go regional for our congressional district and build power that way. And it's been very successful. And I was elected to one of the co-chair positions there. Because of that, Tanya, who was the chair at that point, realized, who was running for chair of the Progressive Caucus, realized all the work I was doing, and ended up asking for me to be a congressional district coordinator on the to serve on the state Progressive Caucus board as well. With that, obviously, resignations happened, and eventually, Tanya resigned, the vice chair resigned, then there was a new chair put into place, and new vice chair put into place, and I was asked to serve as vice chair, and then that chair ended up resigning as well, which ended up putting me into the chair position. So all of that actually spawned out of creating a chapter. And actually like starting to organize within my community, within my local level, right? And it goes to show, and I think that I can probably think of plenty other examples where chapters have been used really as a tool to identify leaders, have them get familiar and really develop them over time as leaders, and put them into those positions of leadership to lead.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And that's so cool to hear that like where you are now comes out of like a chapter, so showing kind of the real success of these local chapters, or like you're saying, regional chapters can have.
Yeah.
Well, Abel, we've had so much fun with you on today. I think we've tackled a lot of really heavy topics. We definitely want to have you back. Thank you so
Hopefully, hopefully without the connection problems for sure.
It's okay. Like we said,
Oh, yeah,
technology. Technology. What can you do?
Yeah, technology is super great, but at the same time, sometimes it's just frustrating.
Yeah. Well, you guys are watching Dive into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara. We'll be streaming live every Saturday, 1 to 2 on WJZZ Cool TV. We thank you so much, Abel, and we'll see you guys next Saturday.